Hi, I'm David Hawks with Agile Velocity, and today I'd like to give you an overview of the Scrum framework. So in Scrum we have three roles. The first role here is what we call the product owner. The product owner is responsible for the vision of the product. They're responsible for turning that vision into an ordered list of items that the team needs to work on, and their job is to create clarity of focus for the team, and they're the main conduit between the team and the customer and trying to bring them closer together. We also have the notion of a Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is helping facilitate the Scrum process. The Scrum Master is helping push the team to get better and trying to help the team figure out how to get better. And then we have what we call the development team. So the development team isn't just people who write code, right? The development team are all of the people required to get the product built. This might be developers, testers, coders, analysts, architects, designers, right? Anybody we need to get this thing built. Now, we start off with this backlog. We call the product backlog that the product owner maintains. Now, anybody can contribute and anybody can help write user stories that might be on this product backlog and feed items into it, but the product owner is responsible for managing it. And what we want it is to be an ordered list of all the things that the team needs to work on. We say ordered, not just prioritized, because if we go to our senior leadership team and say prioritize this list, everything's probably going to come back as priority number one. So we want it to be ordered. This one before this one before this one. Now, the first event of Scrum is what we call sprint planning. In sprint planning, what the team is doing is the team is meeting with the product owner to pull items off of the product backlog and put them into what we call the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is kind of like the sprint plan. What is it that we're going to do? And notice I use the term pull, not push. The idea here is that the product owner does not come to sprint planning and say, hey team, here's what I need you to do in the next 2 weeks. What they're going to do is say, here's the ordered list of items that I need you to pull from, and the team should pull in order, right? They can't just cherry pick. And then they are going to build this sprint backlog over here of those items, and they're going to create these little square things that we call tasks. So they're going to task this out. We encourage teams to create tasks no bigger than a day because we want granular tasks so the team can swarm on getting these items done. The goal of sprint planning is to answer what are we going to work on and how are we going to do it with a shared goal and shared ownership of the team. Now, every day, what we do is we have what we call a daily scrum, and the idea is that the daily scrum, I'm going to put this inside here, is the daily scrum is where the team is going to sync up on their plan, right? So they created that plan, the sprint backlog, and then every day along the sprint, they're going to meet in the daily scrum and huddle for no more than 15 minutes to say, hey, how are things going? Are we still on track? Is everybody, hey, what's everybody working on? So we know, are we working on the right things? And we're pulling in work for the day, right? And we'd call that the daily scrum. Now, a sprint cycle has to be less than 1 month, and most teams do 2-week sprints, and we recommend 2-week sprints as well. We find that's a good balance to have enough agility to adapt to changing requirements, as well as balance that with the team being able to focus. Now, at the end of a sprint, we have to our goal is to deliver what we call a potentially shippable product increment. The idea here is that we're trying to get stuff done of value, of incremental value every 2 weeks. So we call, but it's not that it's going to ship. It doesn't mean that every 2 weeks we have to push something into production. The idea is that it's potentially shippable. It's of quality that it could ship, but it's just an increment of value. So if we were working on a shopping cart, maybe this sprint all we could get done was adding an item to the shopping cart, and next sprint we're actually going to get the credit card processing. But if we test it, and we tested all the product types in our database, we can add items, we can remove items, we can change quantities, and all that code works, but we can't actually, there's no checkout button yet. That's going to come in a later sprint. But by doing that, that will lead to predictability and it will force us to figure out how to break work down in a way where we can deliver little valuable chunks of work along the way. So we deliver this potentially shippable product increment, and what we do is we huddle up with our stakeholders in an event called a sprint review. The idea is, and so here's where we have some new folks that are joining our little party, right? We call these our stakeholders, and our stakeholders will come in, and the team is going to show them or allow them to interact with the potentially shippable product increment, the thing that we just built, the value that we just delivered. And the idea is to get feedback on the work that we did. Now, if we get feedback, then that's going to follow this little path and go back into our backlog, right? So here's every 2 weeks we're trying to get feedback on the thing that we built, make sure we're going down the right path, and see if there's anything that we need to adapt in terms of our product back, in terms of that plan. But the sprint is over at this point. Then the other sprint event that's in here is that we need to do what we call a sprint retrospective. Now, the sprint retrospective is where the team is meeting, just the Scrum team that includes this. So we have the dev team. The Scrum team actually includes product owner, Scrum Master, and dev team. So the product owner, Scrum Master, dev team is what we call the Scrum team. So the Scrum team will meet in the sprint retrospective to figure out how can we improve as a team, how can we get better. So every 2 weeks we're time boxing no more than 90 minutes for us to get together and figure out how can we get better. So we're building continuous improvement as a culture into our sprint cadence. And then that completes a sprint. And then immediately the next day we'll start the next sprint with sprint planning. And we continue to repeat the cycle. And that's, in its simplest form, the Scrum framework. Thank you.